Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Monday, June 9th, 2025. I am John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. Please go to commentary.org and subscribe so that you can read the wonders and glories of our articles and blog posts. They're in there too, and almost 80 years of our archives featuring some of the greatest articles, short stories, and works of the 20th and I would say the 21st centuries at your disposal. As Matt Connetti constantly reminds us, please go to our YouTube channel, Commentary Magazine Podcast, and subscribe there. Also, this is very important to surfacing our video podcast, to the algorithm so that other people will be served it up and can enjoy it the way that you do. And if you're not even interested in that, you could go to Apple, to iTunes, and give us, as Rich Lowry would say, a glowing 5-star review. And if you don't like what you hear here, please forget that I said anything. That is my tribute to Rich Lowry's ordinary introduction to his podcast, Necessary Podcast, The Editors. Our editors here are executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Former editor of the Washington Free Beacon, our current Washington commentary columnist and director of domestic policy studies at the American Enterprise Institute, Matthew Connetti. Hi, Matt.
Hi, John.
Former senior editor of the Weekly Standard and now our social commentary columnist and a fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. A senior fellow, a big cheese fellow, Christine Rosen. Hi, Christine.
Hi, John.
I'm going to throw out a theory here. We're going to get to the scenes in L.A. Over the weekend and the political fight that's going on over the Trump administration's decision, among other things, to announce the deployment of 2,000 National Guardsmen over the objections of the state's governor, Gavin Newsom, to quell the disturbances in L.A. County, which I should say, by the way, before I get much further, that LA County it's not the city of Los Angeles. LA County is gigantic. It stretches 50 miles to the west and 30 miles south and north. It's 9 or 10 different jurisdictions. So when you sometimes hear, as you heard over the weekend, that, oh no, LA is peaceful. Some of LA is peaceful, but other parts of LA County, which is this geographical, I don't even know what you would call it. It's kind of like an empire. It's as though
formation.
Yeah. It's though downtown LA expanded out, as an empire to take over half of Southern California. Nonetheless, here's what I propose to you. When you hear Gavin Newsom, the governor, say, we have this under control, we have enough law enforcement people to control this. When you hear the mayor of Los Angeles, Karen Bass, saying there was no reason for any of this, we can control this. When you hear congressmen, other people saying this, they mean it. By which I mean they are willing to accept as part of our national compact and our constitution and everything like that, that when people get really angry or upset about things, they're going to have demonstrations that are going to turn violent in spaces, and that is acceptable. That the certain level of violence is acceptable for the preservation of our national order, and that demonstrations and protests are so wonderful in their root and in their marrow, because they harken back to the civil rights era, and they harken back to the protests that helped turn the country against the Vietnam War, and they're just wonderful examples of the expression of the popular will. That they mean it when they say it's okay for people to set cars on fire, to throw incendiary devices at members of law enforcement, both local and federal, that it is okay to set cars on fire, that it is okay to shut down highways, that it is okay to trespass, it is okay to spray graffiti on buildings, and that this is something that has become an axiom in blue states across the country from the time of the George Floyd protests onward. So I think we actually have here a genuine, what Tom Sowell would call a genuine conflict of visions about what it means to deal with law enforcement in the United States. And a lot of this is liberals thinking that if you don't like ICE and you want to protest policies of the sitting administration relating to how it handles immigration, that if those demonstrations tip into violence, disorder, and decay, that's a kind of tax that you got to pay to be an American.
Well, and you should resolve them through negotiation and dialogue and peacefully. You don't want any consequences for the people who engage in violence. That's the liberal mentality. We can resolve these differences peacefully. So you'll see Mayor Bass yesterday saying, keep on holding to your anger, Angelinos. I know you're angry and frustrated at this horrible crime against humanity that Donald Trump is perpetrating by enforcing federal law. But just do it peacefully. Just do it peacefully. But if you do it, what she leaves out is, if you do it violently, we're not really going to do anything about it, right? I think that there's been 4 major protest movements this century. The first was the anti-globalization movement, beginning in Seattle, targeting
which
the
began really at the very tail end of the
99.
last century,
Yeah.
but was, you might say,
went
the
into
first
2000.
major event
Went into
of the 21st century. Like the
Yeah.
sign that the politics of the 21st century were going to be radically different
Right.
from the politics of the 20th century.
Right. Then there was the anti-war movement, the anti-Iraq war movement. Then there was the George Floyd protest. And now there's what we've been calling the Omni cause, after the writer Mary Harrington, kind of beginning after October 7th, 2023. And now it seems to me to be folding into this anti-ICE action that's taking place in Los Angeles. Of the 4, only the anti-war movement, I think, could be called a mass movement. And as I recall, it never really collapsed into violence. But 3 of the 4, all are violent. And the inability of the left to stop, or rather the inability of mainstream liberals to stop it, is really striking. And finally, also striking is the curlicue logic by which Donald Trump is responsible for everything. So Governor Newsom of California said yesterday, things were fine until Donald Trump got involved. I don't think so. This all started because there was an ICE raid in a part of the Los Angeles County that is heavily Hispanic, and using social media, protesters came out and tried to stop the raid. They tried to stop the enforcement of the law. And they tried to stop this not by sit-ins or by singing Kumbaya. It began by blocking cars, by violently attacking the ICE officers. And the police did not have control. And we know that the LAPD did not have control because yesterday, at the beginning of the 3rd day, so to speak, of this chaos, the LAPD sent out an alert saying, everybody, all hands on deck. We can't do this. That's precisely the moment you need the National Guard in order to prevent things from getting out of control and having an ICE building or a police precinct burn down, as was the case in Minneapolis in the summer of 2020.
It's worse than that. Just quickly, it's worse than that because the LAPD, Friday night, right? We're recording this Monday morning.
Yeah.
So you're saying the LAPD chief said yesterday, this is totally out of control. We do not have control.
Right.
Friday night, all watches were kept on board. In other words, if your time was up, your 8 hours were up, you were not allowed to go home. The entire LAPD was basically put on alert that they had to stay in place or do whatever it is that they were doing because it had gotten out of control on Friday, not Sunday, not after 3 days.
Sure.
On the first day, the LAPD was saying, we're outmanned and not outgunned, but outrocked or out whatever. And of course, we know that we're not going to be given the okay to, get to mix it up. So we just need bodies. We need bodies. No one go home. And that's around the time that Bass and Newsom started in with this litany that uh, this protest was honorable, and then Trump calls in the guard, and then it's all Trump's fault.
I
That
think
is
it was
okay.
Trump's. They were saying it was Trump's fault by
By having the
sending
raid in the
ICE
first place,
in, by
right?
having the
Well, and
raid in the first place.
this is an important point, because the narrative construction in real time that's happening among Democratic leaders, the protest movement left, and the dominant media, which is obviously all on board ideologically with this, is so selective about understanding history and understanding criminality. Everyone in this country illegally has already broken the law. The purpose of these raids, according to the Trump administration, is actually to catch not just criminals, but people who have feloniously re-entered the country after having already been caught and released back over the border. That change, if you come back after you've already been here illegally and sent home, that the next time you're charged is going to be a higher charge for obvious reasons. So they actually have these warrants. They're going into places and trying to recapture people who've already entered the country illegally more than once. And that's what the protests are about with the ICE folks. But the interesting thing here is that we saw this exact same narrative construction in real time during the George Floyd riots. People, media standing there saying the real problem are the people responding to the law breaking. And we cannot and we won't. I think this will be a very interesting test for these Democratic leaders. People aren't buying that anymore. They're seeing these Waymo, driverless cars called to the scene and torched. They're seeing Mexican and Palestinian flags waved while people burn and spit on the American flag. Those are images that they can find instantaneously on social media. And then they hear Gavin Newsom preening and saying, the real problem is that you're responding to these acts of violence. Nobody's buying it. And I think that's an important shift from the George Floyd era, as well as the fact that the public is behind deporting people who are here illegally. Now, most people are focused, they want to see the criminal element removed first. And that is what the Trump administration has been focusing on and doing well with. But they also want to see repeat offenders who keep coming across our border illegally punished. I do think the rhetoric coming from people like Stephen Miller in the White House is not helpful. One thing they could also point out is how they're going to punish employers who are illegally hiring these people, knowingly hiring folks. There's a bunch of ways rhetorically that they could respond slightly differently. But enforcing federal law and having elected Democratic officials blatantly claim and hold themselves up as honorable for not allowing that enforcement, the American people they are not on the side of this argument from the left.
Yeah, it kind of feels to me like a bit of a sort of the Trump administration getting a redo of 2020. During the George Floyd riots, it was scandalous to suggest in print that the National Guard should be sent in anywhere, right? Today, the administration does it. I think Trump knows that there was something off in the way his administration responded to the chaos in 2020. He said constantly, I am your law and order president, or something like very literal like that. And, but the administration actually never did anything to rein in the chaos. And we just saw it grow and grow and grow and grow, ebb and flow over the intervening years. And I think this is really about kind of rolling back the idea that mass violence is part of the cost of doing business in a democracy.
I think that is a brilliant point, because it's not just Minneapolis, right? Or it's not just Lafayette Park, which was the subject of Tom Cotton's famous op-ed about calling in the National Guard that led, among other things, to the creation of the free press and the destruction of the reputation of the New York Times' editorial page, and maybe the New York Times reputation as a news gathering institution altogether. But it wasn't just Minneapolis. It was, of course, Seattle. It was CHOP in Seattle. You remember this zone in a city that was taken over by
That was the summer of love, John, remember?
Right, yeah, in 2020. Seattle, Portland.
Portland, they'd have nightly fights between Antifa and the federal agents in like a government building. And there again, the mayor of Portland was saying it was Trump's fault for trying to protect the federal property.
Right. So I think then the reason this is a do-over is that the consensus, and it wasn't just a consensus on the left, but kind of in the world of what do you do in these unprecedented situations, is like controlled forest fires. Like, maybe the best thing to do is to do nothing, that you don't know what the consequences will be if you say deploy the National Guard in an incendiary situation. History of deploying the National Guard during the Vietnam War was, of course, at moments tragic, led to tragic conflicts that were, that created mythoses about the evils of the federal government and its behavior, and the essentially the demonization of these poor 19, 20-year-old kids who were just National Guardsmen and were turned into law enforcement officers when that was not, what they had signed up for. All of that is a real thing, and it was a real thing in 2020. And now, after 2020, sorry, we saw what happened when we didn't do it. And we didn't do it despite the accusations against us that we were monstrous and irresponsible. In fact, we were responsible. We did what the experts said was the wiser course in the middle of a pandemic and everything being so crazy. And it was a failure. And though obviously Democrats were more on the side of the protesters than they were of ordinary people, and we, the Trump people, were more on the side of ordinary people than the protesters, couldn't really run as the guy who stopped the madness in America in 2020 because he didn't do it. Now, stopping this madness is elemental to his success as president.
Well, we also look the normalization of political violence on the left, which is a constant theme in this in our conversation, is an important one. This is playing out again, but there's been way too much normalization of political violence on the right as well. And one of the distractions we're seeing in the discussion today about the National Guard is, well, why didn't Trump call them out on January 6th? So a lot of his moral high ground was eroded by his behavior on January 6th. It's just the case, because calling for the National Guard in one case but not the other when it was asked for. And that's actually another important point. One of the things that people are picking over is the fact that Newsom didn't request it. And this is unusual for a president to send troops in without the request of the local officials. But in this case, the local officials have already publicly stated multiple times over that they're happy to violate federal law and to prevent federal officers from doing their job. So I do think that there's a lot of harking back to the civil rights era by Democrats. I don't think they're actually proving the point that they think they are in doing that.
No, they're on the other side.
Exactly.
In fact, in Governor Newsom's statement, he says that Trump's decision to take over command of the California National Guard, as is Trump's right, violated state sovereignty, which was the calling card of the anti-civil rights Democrats during the 50s and 60s. 50s is when Eisenhower brought in the National Guard to integrate the Central High School in Little Rock. So a couple things about 2020. First, John, as you mentioned, the pandemic played a huge role. Yesterday, some of the protesters blocked, I think, the 101, one of the major highways in LA. And you could see the traffic. And when finally authorities removed the protesters, people were cheering in their cars. In the summer of 2020, there wasn't much traffic. People were home. I think that led to a certain detachment from what was going on. I mean, I recall looking at what was happening in the chopped autonomous zone in Seattle almost with bemusement because it was so strange. And of course, we were all in our houses or just going out to parks, and the staggering hypocrisy that the only legitimate form of social contact was protest and or violent protest, I think was hitting home. And the second thing on 2020 is it's true that Trump is, I think, correcting from the mistakes he made in waiting too long to assert federal control over the disorder. But the riots still helped him. That was, of course, the subject of the left-wing data analyst David Shor's famous paper that got him fired from his left-wing institution, that he showed that whenever there is widespread social disorder, the right benefits. And even Trump's position that he took against the riots throughout the summer of 2020, I think helped him win more votes in 2020 than he got in 2016, for example.
The successful arguments, I think. Now, Christine said the American people aren't going to buy it. We'll see. We don't really know where this is all going to land over the long run. But to me, it seems to me that the successful arguments that are being made about Trump's enforcement in the second term of immigration law, or emergency powers used to do things, is that he is not following the law, that the plane flights, that the the detentions of people mistakenly who are then not returned to the United States, and we can talk about that in a minute, about the return of Kilmar Abrego Garcia to the United States, all of that there's some bite and some punch to the idea that he is going around the limits that a president is bound by to get his way. And so he's behaving lawlessly in some fashion, and that this is unnerving to people of goodwill who think he's going too far. And so a lot of polling suggests that people think they support the aims generally, but think he might be going too far here or there or the other place. This is exactly the reverse. Going after people who are in the country illegally, using the border immigration enforcement officers whose job it is to do just this, and then claiming that that is lawless, and that defending them and protecting them is, I don't know what it is. It's God's law. It's sort of the law of, kindness and, good spirit or something like that. That argument is just not going to hold. And it means that you then have to go down the road and say, ICE is the Gestapo.
Well, they're doing that.
They are doing that.
I
And
want to talk
that
about
is
that.
where, and so if we're talking about political consequences over time, I'm now going to go back to the 60s and 70s when liberals and the left bought into the argument that police officers and American military personnel in Southeast Asia were criminals, that they were using extra legal means to detain people, and they weren't Mirandizing them properly, and they were committing ghastly war crimes in the jungles of Vietnam and Laos and Cambodia. And that ordinary people looked at this and were repulsed by the fact that these working class people who sign up to protect everybody, or who were drafted out of their high schools to go and fight for their country, are being abused, character assassinated, and accused of vicious monstrosity by these long hair, rich, limousine liberal monsters. And this is the tipping point for the Democratic Party in 2025. If their behavior allows Trump to make the case that the Democratic Party cannot be trusted because they are on the side of lawbreakers and on the side of disorder, and that they are fomenting disorder in pursuit of their ideological agenda, he is going to solidify that argument in the minds of voters who don't otherwise care that or aren't thinking about this that
this
much.
Is actually where I think he risks making a strategic and rhetorical mistake. I support his enforcement of immigration law, but to reach those voters, not the ones who are already loving the rhetoric about migrant invasion that he puts on True Social, but for those voters, the ones who gave him this last election, the message to them is, you might not like how we're having to clean up this mess, but the mess was created by the Biden administration deliberately flouting its responsibility to control our border. It allowed everyone in. It lied about it. It has not tracked the people it let in. It's a security risk to our country. Some of these people were on the terrorist watch list. So saying that over and over again, that's what the normie voter is supporting him on, because they look around and they go, or saying, if you want to be a sanctuary city, fine. All the migrants go to the sanctuary cities and you figure out economically how to support all these people who are in the country illegally. I mean, there are lots of ways to do it without talking about migrant invasion. That's the rhetoric of the very strong anti-immigration right that doesn't want to see anyone here from another country. And that is also not a feasible position for most people in the middle.
I think that California's problem has been in the making long before Joe Biden. And it's California.
Yeah, this is like a 30-year problem.
It's a 30-year problem
Yeah.
of illegal immigration. And it's just one of California's problems. So the first thing I'd like to say is about California. I mean, it is kind of proud, the Democratic political establishment, which is essentially a monoculture since Arnold Schwarzenegger shifted left after the 2006 election, is very proud of itself for being the standard bearer of progressivism in the United States. But look at the state of the California Republic. You have this violence over the weekend. You have a city that's clearly not controlled by the political authorities there. By the fact that you have this huge population of illegal immigrants who are waving Mexican flags as they try to interrupt ICE actions, and that's a failure of government. And it comes after just 6 months after these terrible wildfires, which burned much of the city down, the city of Los Angeles down. And has the rebuilding started? Is it back to where we want it to be?
Hey, there have been 5 permits issued, Matt. Come on.
Right, exactly. So there's not only the failure of the political authorities in California to prevent and or stop the forest fires from taking exacting such a toll, but also the failure to actually rebuild correctly. Now, on top of that, you have just the kind of the state of the state, where it's been bleeding out citizens, residents for decades now because of its over-the-top liberal governance. I mean, this is the problem child of the United States. It's not something to be proud of. And when you read Kamala Harris's statement, where the Democratic nominee for president in 2024 says that unequivocally that what Trump is doing here in trying to enforce immigration law is evil, borderline evil, and because she stands with our immigrant neighbors, I guess that means illegal immigrants as well. Again, making no distinction between citizens and non-citizens or various levels of residency in the United States. I think it's a marginalization of the Democratic Party that we've been seeing playing out. And that leads to my other point I wanted to make, which is, as people know, I love reading old magazines. And when I was studying journalism, while working in journalism, I would read the back issues of the Great American Spectator magazine. And in the 70s and 80s, the American Spectator had a section called, they still have it, but they had a section called Current Wisdom, which was hilarious quotes from left-wing activists or Democratic politicians showing how out of touch they were. You could fill an entire Current Wisdom on some of the stuff that liberals and the left have been saying over the past 72 hours. The idea that what Donald Trump did over the weekend is a rehearsal for canceling the midterm elections next year. The logic that enforcing the law and trying to prevent civil unrest is authoritarianism. That's authoritarianism. The prediction that Trump is going to use this federalism fight to become a dictator. The mostly peaceful canard, which you see again and again as these masked protesters waving Mexican flags or Palestinian flags throw cinder blocks at cops from highway overpasses and use potentially lethal fireworks. We are seeing the loony left in its fullness, and this is a problem not just for the Democratic Party; it's a problem for the country.
I just was saying, I think what makes the left, what drives them so crazy, is that they are so hyper focused on rhetoric, message, what language to use, how do we talk to get our point across to the American people. We just need to shape the message the right way. And then in Trump, you have almost the inverse, which is like, we're going to say whatever we're just going to say whatever we want. The message comes across in action, and the voters or the American people have sort of learned to kind of disregard the message, the spoken Trump message, and wait for the action, and then sort of assess it on that, assess Trump on that basis. And that is just maddening for the other side, because he sort of slides, he sort of he sort of messages without paying any attention to messaging, and it works.
Donald Trump in 2024 got 45% of the Hispanic vote. Watching not only the politicians in California, but the politicians in New York and New Jersey, both places having substantial Hispanic populations and have primaries coming up in the next couple of weeks, you would imagine that they still believe that Democrats get 70% of the Hispanic vote, and that they are going to solidify returns at the polling place to them by siding with the illegals. And I think this is, not only is it insulting, since voters by definition are citizens of the United States, and if they are themselves immigrants, it means that they have gone through the laborious process to become citizens of the United States, including the laborious process of entering the country legally, not just getting citizenship through an amnesty or something, but coming here legally, following the rules, getting a green card, finally becoming citizens. And this argument that is being made that there is no distinction to be made between them and people who are here illegally, who are trying either to jump the line or who are, not committing themselves to the United States, but are here sending remittances home and have no role or stake in the American national experiment, is an act of partisan suicide in the long term. It would be as though you said to me in 1972 that I stand, because Mayor Kahana, running a vigilante group in Brooklyn, was breaking the law. You should support politicians should support Mayor Kahana because he's there for the Jews. So all Jews are like Mayor Kahana. This is an insult to extrapolate from a political controversy involving one part of a group to the law-abiding vast majority of law-abiding people who just want to get on with their lives and who might even harbor a certain higher level of resentment toward the lawbreakers than, the white supremacists do. Who is it worse for if the 101 is shut down? Is it worse for a, Hollywood movie producer who's trying to drive his kid to an away baseball game, or to a, domestic worker who's got to get to her job, or to a factory worker who's got to get to his factory, or a guy who runs a food cart who's got to get to position his food cart on his corner? All these kinds of things, when you privilege crime over order or over citizenry, fall most heavily on the people who have the least resources to combat the effects of the crime. Right? It's if you don't do something about crime in the worst neighborhoods, the people who suffer aren't the people on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. They're the people who live next door to the criminals. And this is how the Democratic Party lost the American center. Remember, Lyndon Johnson was the last American president to call himself a liberal until 2008. It was 44 years from Johnson's election in 64 to Obama saying, yes, I'm a liberal in 2008. Now, Democrats controlled House, controlled the Senate, whatever. There were, this wasn't a. But when Americans got together to vote in a plebiscite nationally about who should run the country, there was landslide after landslide after landslide for law and order Republicans until a conservative Democrat came in and said, I'm actually so conservative that I'm going to put a retarded man to death so that I can win your vote. A man with I'm sorry, you're not allowed to use the word retarded anymore. A mentally disabled man who thought he could save his dessert for after his execution. I'm putting him to death so I can show you how serious I am about this. Not a liberal, right? So they don't look at history and see where they're walking down a path to with a president they should be able, given his irresponsibility and recklessness and other issues, they should be able to contest. And best, they are walking into his buzzsaw. They are ceding the idea of what it means to live an ordinary life as an American to him and his party, because they have become ideologically committed to the idea that law breaking is morally superior to law keeping.
Yeah, and that citizenry has no meaning, right?
Well, that is the ultimate, right?
I mean, there's no meaning. Come over. Yeah. The border doesn't matter. California has had this issue for 30 plus years. There was a brief period between the financial crisis in 2008 and the first migrant crisis in 2014, where there was actually net zero illegal migration in the United States. But since then, it's continued. And I left out other crises California's had. This is the same. I don't understand why I am supposed to take moral guidance from Karen Bass, the mayor of Los Angeles, who, in addition to letting her, 30% or whatever of her city burn down just 6 months ago, has been unable to deal with the homelessness crisis that is raging in Los Angeles, has been unable to deal with the crime in Los Angeles that's been terrible since 2020. Why is she a moral authority? It raises the question, John, that you discussed, but who are they talking to? I think they're just talking to themselves. I really do. I think that's what liberals do, is just try to police the boundaries of language amongst themselves. And then every so often they're able to bully the rest of us into following it.
But there is another group that they see themselves as part of, and I think you're right, Matt, talk with amongst the group, but apply its lessons to everyone in a way that, John, you're right to say is going to be political suicide. Do you remember in the 90s, the same time that you started seeing the rise of more conservative Democratic politicians like Bill Clinton, you also saw the rise of language about global citizens and NGOs, the real increase in funding for NGOs. A lot of what we're seeing play out now is also the long thread of these NGOs that don't just provide funding and money to more radical extremist smaller groups in a trickle-down way, but also provide a kind of parasocial sense of identity. For a lot of young people now, that's where the Omnicause thing comes from. It's like, our world is terrible, the United States is terrible, so we can attach ourselves to these causes, and it doesn't matter. They can shift from being pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel to, pro-climate change, stuff. And they all have the same tactics, though, which is to block the 101, to set things on fire, or in the case of, our international NGO celebrity Greta Thunberg, to sail and, past a blockade. That has grown alongside a Democratic Party in the United States that has tried to occasionally assert its more thoughtful acknowledgement of voters' views.
Well, why don't we move on to Greta Thunberg and her flotilla of liberation.
Her selfie ship.
The flotilla of liberation coming to Gaza to go to Gaza. I mean, I don't even know what their plan was when they got off the ship.
They said they were going to bring food.
Oh yes, they were bringing food. Because it's not as though the Israelis, this food organization that Israel has set up with American contractors has not been distributing more than 1 million meals a day for a week, unless Hamas gets in the way and makes it impossible for them to do so, as happened the other day. Literally, 1 million meals a day are being distributed under Israel's aegis to the enemy population of the country, whatever, the territory at which they are at war, in a historically unprecedented act, an event in world planetary history. It's working, it's happening, but thankfully, Greta Thunberg and other people on this boat, they love to send boats to Israel, right? There was this famous flotilla of boats in 2011 led by the Mavi Marmara, coming from Turkey to also do something to help Gaza or whatever. So what happened? So the boat came closer and closer and closer. And then finally, when it was sort of like getting a little close, so basically the Israelis boarded the boat, said, hi, here's some water, here's a sandwich. We're just going to tug you in, and maybe we'll help to make you, some provision for your return back home. We're not arresting you. We're not doing anything. We're just, this is the war zone, and you really can't come into a war zone like that. Greta Thunberg then, smiling, ate her sandwich, drank her water. So since they were, and then said she had been kidnapped, which, to speak of the insensitivity of the use of a single word involving the trigger of the conflict that she was deciding she could interpose herself in, when there are 23 people in those tunnels who are probably very near death, and bodies of another, 59 more who are there awaiting proper burial, shows how the Omni cause's supposed large-hearted understanding of what it means to be human gives way to the genuinely despicable moral ugliness at the root and center of their mission.
Greta Thunberg has become the human embodiment of the leftist radical pathology. It's all right there in her. Every time she appears, she seems off. I mean, in terms of her mental or emotional state, she is desperate for attention. She is completely ignorant, and she is hysterical and childish. The fact that she remains this permanent child is like the perfect emblem. It makes her the perfect representative of the Omni cause in this way. And talk about what I think is a net negative for the left. I think she's out there. Her being the radicals' global ambassador is, I think, going to be something that people will look back at and laugh at, and or if you're on the other side, regret.
The other symbol is Luigi Mangione. And there you kind of have the two halves. I mean, the violent psychopath side, and then the kind of just performative, hysterical side. Thunberg showed up about a decade ago with her, hysterical proclamations of impending global apocalypse. And
she was 13 years old.
She was 13. She became the symbol of the Green New Deal. And after October 2023, she's shifted into anti-Semitic, pro-Hamas protest. I think it's time to take away her kid card. She's 22 years old, so she's been a legal adult now for 4 years. So again, this type of moral blackmail that I think the left tries to commit against everyday people can't be justified, can't be tolerated, and especially not with her anymore. I remember when she first showed up on the scene, the Washington Free Beacon ran a piece critical of her and also her speaking style. And we received a scornful email, a lecturing email from a very prominent reporter in the United States saying, how dare we go after Greta Thunberg because, after all, she's on the spectrum. Hence, we cannot criticize Greta Thunberg. And she's a child. Well, I won't identify the reporter, but I will say, sorry, lady, no more. It's 2025. I can say whatever I want about Greta Thunberg. She's 22 years old. She's like a menacing joke. And I'm not going to submit to the scolds any longer.
But
Well, there
that's
is-
I just
Okay.
want to, very quickly, that's another important aspect of what she embodies, which is the victim as well, right? Yeah.
Yes. Well, it's interesting. There have been a few signs in this most recent couple of days of people on the left acknowledge or saying the quiet part out loud about what they see happening, the extremism of it. So you've seen a couple people say, either on social media or in statements, let's not burn things down. Let's remain peaceful. Like, don't chuck rocks at the federal officers. Let's show them that this is a peaceful movement. And just like Luigi Mangione showed them the logical consequence of their rhetoric, that's not possible. It's actually that genie's been out of the bottle, in part because, as we were talking about earlier, since 2020 and since the lack of a crackdown on attacks on federal office buildings and federal officers, they don't see any sort of risk in doing this. And in fact, they get a lot of positive attention from the more extreme activist groups for doing what they're doing. They believe they're on the right side of history. And history is important here because a lot of what Abe was saying earlier about the kind of careful use of words and, the harking back to, this is just what Hitler would do, or this is what, this other terrible historical figure would do. The very careful selective amnesia about history here is important. And the Democrats are the one practicing that. Trump doesn't care about history at all. Like he wants to do his Garden of Heroes, but basically he is not someone who's historically minded. The Democrats want to see themselves as being on the right side of history, and yet they're very selective about what they choose. What's her name? Heather Cox Richardson, who has this she's a historian who has this very popular newsletter. If you read, as I have done, how she portrays this for her many, many, many readers, that's exactly what she does. She very carefully selects data points that make it look as if this is a long, slow march toward authoritarianism, rather than showing the complicated back and forth of what Democrats have done in terms of immigration policy, what the state of California, as Matt said, has done with regard to everything. It's all very selective, but it creates a very self-reinforcing narrative for them.
Look, as a propaganda tool, even as a self-propaganda tool, Greta Thunberg a decade ago was extraordinarily effective for a very simple reason. First of all, the cause was global warming, and global warming is an arguable phenomenon. I am skeptical of it, but obviously this has been a matter of major discussion. There's scientific evidence for it, but whatever you want to describe, 150 nations believe it's happening or setting policies to combat it. And she came along as the embodiment of this argument that I am a kid. I am a representative of the people that you are bequeathing this world to, and you might be bequeathing to me a lifeless shell of fire. And so I am standing here as a renewed version of Joan of Arc to say, save this planet for people like me. Now, that's a very emotionally resonant argument for a lot of people. And it has the advantage of having some kind of a pseudoscientific polish to it. When she moves on from that to the Omni cause, she's just a kid opening up her rotten little mouth about things she doesn't understand, about Gaza and Jews and Israel and starvation and genocide. And has she read a book? We have no idea. She's clearly never really been to school. She's been an international celebrity her whole life. There's no one on earth who needs to get a lecture from Greta Thunberg on what's going on in Gaza. She doesn't know what's going on in Gaza. She couldn't have found Gaza on a map until a year ago, if even she could find Gaza on a map now. And so this idea that you just get famous and then you can open up your mouth and talk about things that this is celebrity culture at its finest. It's like when you're, Meryl Streep, so you could start talking about the evils of Alar or something like that because you're Meryl Streep. She has no standing in this matter. She has no knowledge. She is just somebody who was famous for something else who has now adopted this. And that is the Omni cause's strength and its like terrifying downfall weakness for the people who support it, which is that since everything is the same as everything else, the people who it's just like, oh, I saw you at the Palestine rally, and now you're going to be at the ICE rally, and then you're going to be at the other thing. You're just an extra. You're all just extras in the Cecil B. DeMille Battle of the Left, to show never before in human history have we seen so many people out to protest so much. And the effect of it over time is to wear it back and to make people go, oh no, not again, not another highway being shut down. You shut down my highway over October 7th. Now you're shutting down my highway over ICE. The next time you try to shut down my highway and I'm got a road rage because I'm in this for 3 hours, I'm going to take my car and run you down. I mean, that's the other thing that is going to start happening, which is that ordinary people are going to start taking extra legal measures of their own because their lives are being interfered with constantly by this, sort of like this itinerant army of anti-Western, anti-American, anti-ordinary life haters. And yes, they are going to encourage activity against them.
Well, and this is important because actually most people aren't interfered with by these activists. If you live in a blue city or blue state, I've encountered some of them. Obviously, they've shut down roads around Washington off and on over the years. But what's important is seeing that behavior punished with the full force of the law. And that's what average people who see a little clip on social media or on local news or cable news, they look at that and they go, well, that's wrong. Like, they shouldn't block a highway. That's bad. But what happens to those people? Absolutely nothing. And that over and over again has bred a sense of resentment about the fact that the rule of law is not applied equally to people who do things like that because their cause is viewed as just by the prosecutor in LA or New York or wherever. And their own behavior, which if they did that, they knew they'd be swept up, arrested, and prosecuted. So that sense of a two-tier system of justice is exactly why we do have allowable emergency powers that the executive can enforce, including if they're a governor or a president calling in the National Guard. That's to stop the kind of retributive, vigilante style of justice. It's why George Bush brought in the Guard after the Rodney King verdict. I mean, these are sent them at the request of California. But that's what's important, because I might not be affected in my daily life, but seeing that behavior, just like seeing lots of people shoplift without prosecution, it wears down people's civic sense of coherence and their sense of connection to their fellow citizens. And it's bad. It's just really bad for social order to see that over and over again.
The line involving free speech, when the understanding of free speech got expanded from the early 1960s onward, so that censorship laws fell by the wayside, and Lenny Bruce, once prosecuted, would never have been prosecuted, and books were no longer banned, and all of that. And then also, political marches of a noxious order, the most notorious being the Nazi Party march through Skokie, Illinois, the community with the largest percentage of Holocaust survivors living in the United States. Was the argument of the First Amendment absolutists was, I may despise what it is you have to say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it, because your right to say that has a connection to my right to say what I want to say. So I am not morally in favor of your views. Your views are disgusting, but our Constitution says you should be able to say what you have to say or assemble in the way that you have to assemble. The oddity of what's happened in those years since. By the way,
assembly.
That was disingenuous. A lot of that, I defend to the death your right to say. That was because it was an effective line. It was kind of hard to argue with, right? You disgust me, but you have a right to say what you have to say. Sort of like what you would say in an ordinary conversation with somebody in a living room, instead of like throwing a chair at their head at a cocktail party when things got heated. Okay. Now we have your views. I support your views and will defend to the death your right to say them. Like, you know what? You shut down the one. You go ahead and burn a car. Go ahead. not only do you have the right to say it,
It's Trump's
you're
fault.
right to do it.
Trump made you burn that Waymo.
Yeah. I mean, there's this one quote I think I have to read out because it is the perfect encapsulation, because it's not from an activist. It's not from a politician. It's from a news anchor in LA on ABC7, and I had it here, and then I
You
closed
tweeted
the
it to
window.
us.
I did, so I'm going to find it.
Also, can
Or
I
you
just say, for
messaged
those of
us.
us who are freaked out by Waymo, it was I was so conflicted watching those cars burn
Yeah.
because
you should
I
be pro
find them
Waymo,
Yeah.
and this is why. Because the Waymo, first
wrong. It was bad.
they'll come for the Waymos, Christine.
right. I mean, it was bad.
That's right.
I do not
Yeah.
support what they did, but
Yes. Okay. So this is the anchor of ABC LA Channel 7. It could turn very volatile if you move law enforcement in there the wrong way and turn what is just a bunch of people having fun watching cars burn into a massive confrontation and altercation. There, according to the anchor of the local newscast in the second largest city in America, it is acceptable for people to just be having fun watching cars burn. The fact that they're watching cars burn, an act of vandalism and massive property damage in the hundreds of
dangerous
thousands
fire
of
risk.
dollars.
Did we just add the fire risk?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. So the problem here is that law enforcement is going to cause a massive confrontation and altercation with people who are just standing there. Literally, what is the phrase? Watching. What is the phrase from The Dark Knight? They
Watching it
just
all burn.
want to watch the world,
the world
burn.
Yeah.
They want to watch, and that is
They also
what
want to
is now
set fire to the world.
Right.
I mean,
But that is the logical end argument from where I began talking on this podcast, which is that it is the idea that there is something morally elevating about committing crimes in pursuit of a common leftist ideological agenda that is, I think, in the long run, an act of political suicide for one of the two major parties in the United States. And it's terrifying because tens of millions of people vote Democratic. Like, I don't like that this is where, the governor of the largest state in the country, the governor of the fourth largest state in the country, that's New York, kind of also implicitly echoes this idea that ICE has no right to enforce federal immigration law in her state because she doesn't want to anger interest groups in her state. That kind of thing. Like, this is horrible for our good public order. Horrible. It's a delegitimization of law by people who are officials sworn to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States of America and all laws foreign and all matters foreign and domestic involving public safety. So that's where we are right now. Matt, I believe you are pulling a card I don't know that you've ever actually pulled before. You are more of an enthusiast in the recommending game, but you are actually going to do what I do occasionally and actively disrecommend a work.
I am about to disrecommend a work, John. Interestingly enough, it relates to what you were talking about regarding celebrity culture just a moment ago. Over the weekend, I took about an hour and a half of my time to watch a new documentary on Apple TV Plus called Bono: Stories of Surrender. This is a filmed staging of the one-man show that Bono, the lead singer of rock band U2, performed when his memoir Surrender came out a couple years ago. And I watched it because, like many people who were born in the 80s, grew up in the 90s, and before, if you grew up in the 80s altogether, I'm a fan of U2, really like U2. Really kind of between the period of their first album, Boy, and the album they put out around, I think over 10 years ago now, 15 years ago, called No Line on the Horizon. in between those two periods, I really am a big U2 fan, and I was able to kind of countenance the political activity commentary of Bono. So I wanted to see him sing some of his songs. Well, he doesn't really sing the songs, and that's why I'm just recommending it. You hear a few pieces of the songs that we all like if you're a U2 fan, New Year's Day, Streets with No Name, and so forth. Even some early songs, Electrico, one of my favorites. But really, it's an unending monologue by Bono, who is over dramatic, has an ego the size of Jupiter, and just is boring, actually. Telling some. Also, it's kind of weird that you'd think there'd be an interesting life he's led, but actually, no. I mean, he's mixed up. He's mixed up in, of course, Irish politics, which are fascinating on their own, and he has views on that. And okay, and then he had a very, it seems, complicated and even antagonistic relationship with his father. But at the same time, it's never clear what the disagreements necessarily were over. I guess it was his choice of career to become basically a punk rocker who then becomes a global megastar. I just don't get it. He spends 20 minutes talking about Pavarotti. And, I like Pavarotti too, but there's no drama there. So I have to do it. I have to just recommend this documentary. Don't watch it. Bono's Stories of Surrender. If you like U2, just listen to the old albums.
Very quickly, though, if I could make a pitch for other Nepo babies, I would like to say that Bono's daughter, whose name is Eve Hewson, who is an actress, one of the co-stars of the wonderful Apple series Bad Sisters, which is her murder mystery involving a family of sisters, one of whose husbands seems to die of natural causes, but an insurance adjuster is sure that he's died of unnatural causes, which in fact he has. And she is enchanting in it. She is an absolutely delightful actress. You would never know she doesn't look like Bono. Her name is not, Eve Bono. And I just think she is the cat's pajamas, and I would be remiss if I did not mention, I have to say, and I hope you will excuse me, not only Nepo babying, but also giving a shout out to my dear friend, the movie producer, Anthony Bregman, produced a movie in which she starred called Flora and Son, I believe also available on Apple TV, about a teenage mother of a teenage son, and how she becomes
She takes guitar lessons, isn't that?
And becomes a singer.
Joseph Gordon-Levitt's in that. It's cute. It's a good movie. Yeah.
It's a wonderful movie, and she is wonderful. So we are trashing Bono today, which is fine with me, but Eve Hewson is well worth your time. So we will be back tomorrow. For Christine, Matt, and Abe, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.